All right,
Yeah,
here we go again. Well, take a break, take a nice deep breath because we're going
time to
back to
dunk
the
on
well.
MLS some more.
Yep, here we go. I'm going to reiterate the point, and again, you can cut me off if you disagree with me. I do not support what MLS has done leaving the U.S. Open Cup. As somebody who understands the meaning behind improving the bottom levels to bring them up as a whole, removing that becomes a big deal. As somebody who understands the history of football needing to be extended, right? I was thinking about this the other day. I heard uh, a snippet of a podcast, and I'll talk to you about it after because I don't want it recorded. But I heard a snippet of this podcast that basically was talking about how English soccer history and U.S. soccer history are basically, everybody says it's a 100-year head start, but really it's a 20-year head start because they started in the 80s and we started in the 1900s, like started getting things rolling, right? The difference is that British history, British football history, or European history in the game of football in general is continuous, right? It started and it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. Where in the United States, it started and then FIFA came in and slashed it. And then we had a 20-year period where it existed, but it wasn't at the professional level, so nobody cared, right? Then we get to the NASL days, and then it died because they overspent too much. And now we've got another 10-year period where it didn't exist. So we're chopped. Extended history versus choppy history are not the same thing. So if you want to grow the game, you need to continue it, not start chopping things up and putting pieces together. That's not how you grow this. That being said, and again, I'm sorry, let me throw it to you. Do you agree with me?
Oh, well, I mean, fully, but also the fact of the matter is that the US has four other sports, which are arguably the strongest leagues in the world, that I just don't think any other countries have that level of competition for the main sport in their country. Like, I think, England's probably got other sports that are popular as well, but like soccer is far and away the most popular. And it's like, there's no competition there. And that's the way with so many European countries. But in the US, we have the NFL, which is massively popular. You have the MLB, which is also very popular, has some of the best players from all around the entire world. Same thing with the NBA. The best players from all around the world come and play in the NBA. They come and play in the MLB. Nobody else really plays NFL, so that's just the Americans. But NHL might be more up for debate. I'm not going to say that all the best players come here because I don't know what's going on in like Russia and Scandinavia. I know they love their hockey there too, so I don't want to say anything that's going to get me in hot hockey water. But
Patrick will come after you.
yeah, but there's massive competition just within the sports world in the US. Like it's so much more difficult to grow the league faster here when there's so many other sports people can watch.
Yeah, yeah, and you can't take those times out to not grow it, right? And that's actually a really good transition because if you want to hear our original takes on this, right? We did a full hour-long episode on the original US Open Cup drama. And I didn't listen to it back, but looking over my notes when I was doing this, all of my points still stand. Like I don't look back and be like, oh yeah, I don't think anything I said in that episode I would reconsider to this day. So if you want to hear our thoughts on the original decision and what they're doing, please go listen to that episode. Um, you can dive in and listen to all of our thoughts on that because it goes a lot deeper than what we've been doing the last couple of or what we're going to do here. It dives deeper into that um, mindset. I will give you the episode number. That is episode 201. So you can go into episode 201. You can listen to our thoughts. You can go onto YouTube. We have clips about it. It's it's a lot more deep cutting. But in this section of this episode of episode two, what are we on? 233? Yeah, 233. Crazy.
Yeah.
Of episode 233, I want to dive into the nuances of this. So, what it means long term, the role of both parties, so MLS and USL, the history of kind of what, where this precedent lies, and a little bit more stuff like that. It's going to be a difficult conversation. I think I'm going to say things people aren't going to be happy with, and I'm okay with that because I have different views on what this might mean. Um, so let's talk a little bit. Unless you have anything else you want to add here, I want to talk about where we're at and kind of what we got into. Yeah,
No,
this isn't as easy of a back and forth as our other episodes because it's kind of tough to share thoughts and then bring others in. So apologies for the choppiness of this one, but I hope we get through it. Um, so MLS back in December said that they were going to put all of their next pro teams in to play in the U.S. Open Cup. U.S. Soccer bounced back and said, "Hey, thanks, but no thanks. See you in April." That went on for about a month, and everybody's like, "Okay, great. We solved the problem. MLS is going to play. Screw them, right?" Then MLS comes back and says, "Hey, by the way, we're only going to send 8 teams to the U.S. Open Cup," and that's kind of where we're at right now. USL threatened for a long time, or not for a long time, for a short time, just to not play at all on the principle of the thing, which again, I'm not gonna dive too deep into it, but that's kind of what would have, I guess I'll say, poked a hole in the whole logic, right? MLS is leaving because it's not making enough money, and USL saying, "Oh well, it's about the thing of the cup," and then MLS pulls out and they say, "Oh, we're not going to play anyway." Well, is it about the cup then, or is it about the money? So I'm glad that they're going to stick around. Um, if MLS was going to play, there were rumors that they would only play if they would get the revenue from the away games of lower league teams, which is absolutely absurd. And then USL decided that they are going to play. That's kind of where we're at. Where are you at now? I guess personally, anything change for you? Do you have any other thoughts?
so I think last episode, I feel like the conclusion was we didn't like it. We think that MLS is going about it in a really crappy way. But at the same time, we kind of understood why they made the decision they did. Like, if there was going to be a competition to cut out of the schedule, like Leagues Cup was a cash cow for them last year. Like, of course, they're not going to cut that off. Like, it's going to, like, US Open Cup was in the crosshairs 100%. Like, teams were already rotating a ton of players every time they played in it. I think we talked about some quotes which were talking about the quality, not just of like the broadcast, but also just the games in general that people were not happy about. So I like if there was going to be a competition for them to cut out of the schedule, like that was going to be the one. Like you weren't going to cut out Champions League, obviously. It was between them and Leagues Cup, and Leagues Cup was such a hit in the first year. Like a league that's as money hungry as this one, as we've talked about extensively this episode, like of course they're not going to cut the Leagues Cup out. With all that said, like again, I don't agree with how they're going about this, especially with the recent stuff they've been talking about. It's just even makes it them look even worse. I did want to mention one thing though that I feel like is kind of my like more recent thought process on this, but I feel like I've seen a lot of fan anger towards the Leagues Cup, and I get why that's the case because Leagues Cup comes around, and now all of a sudden the US Open Cup is out. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of like put the pieces together. Like, okay, Leagues Cup came in, like that's the reason US Open Cup is getting the boot. But I feel like the frustration should be aimed towards, and this is just my opinion, but I think it should be aimed towards the league and the way that the league does their financial rules because it's not absurd to have two cup competitions, Champions League and a full season. Like that's exactly what England does. England has the FA Cup, Carabao Cup, they have Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, and then they have their regular season. Like that's exactly what MLS is shaping up to be if they had all of these in place. The only difference is that MLS has all these financial restrictions, which make it so that they can't properly get depth in a team so that they can rotate properly and give guys rest so that they're not playing 70 games in a season. Like I don't think that's a ridiculous schedule to have all these competitions together, but you gotta like make it so that teams can actually properly spend their money, get the depth, and then actually try and be competitive in all these competitions. But they don't do that. And instead, I feel like people are putting their anger towards the Leagues Cup, which I mean, I personally wouldn't want to see the Leagues Cup go. I thought it was really fun last year. And I think MLS fans have been every year we talk about the Champions League. We're like, okay, MLS has to start playing Champions League every year with no like match fitness because our season hasn't started. Okay, Leagues Cup's a great chance then. We get our chance against the Liga MX teams in mid-season form. Like I think it's a good competition. I'd like to see it be kept along with US Open Cup. In my opinion, the frustration should be towards the roster rules. And I think there needs to be more financial flexibility so that teams can build depth and try and be competitive in all these competitions and not just completely sack one off.
No, that's spot on, dude. Like I've put out this tweet 4 times now. Every time something like this pops up is like the answer to fix this was so easy. Allow either expanded rosters like in your own rules because US Open Cup allows it. Like the guys I follow who I've chatted about a couple of times with US Open Cup history tweet it out all the time. Like US Open Cup as a competition allows unlimited second team loans. Like if you are like LAFC at Monterey Bay, for example, full team of twos and Eldon Yakupovic, but full team, and there was nothing wrong with that. But MLS in its roster has like four. Like you get 4 games where you can call them up, and then that's it. Like that's an easy change. The expanding the rosters for like spending depth and things like that's a little bit tougher. But to go out and say, hey, we are going to change this rule for you guys to say, hey, if you want to go after US Open Cup with your first team in every game, go right ahead. We're not going to stop you. If you do not want to and you want to rotate, we're going to let you rotate as many times as you want. You can call up players for short-term loans if you got injuries, like on a short game week, international break, whatever. Any time that you call somebody up for a US Open Cup game, it doesn't count. We're just going to let you do it. It's easy. Like it is so simple. Instead, you go out and you make this whole big fiasco about, look at me, I'm going to make this history altering decision about leaving the biggest historical Open Cup, competition in the country when all I had to do was say, hey, just call up the kids and you're good. It's so silly. But
It's funny
anyways,
because they
go ahead.
wanted to send the MLS Next Pro teams when they could have just done your decision, not made a big fiasco out of it. Teams could have just called up their next pro teams and then just put them in the US Open Cup under like the main branding, and then nothing would have changed. Like it wouldn't have been a bad look on the league then because they wouldn't have been like trying to get out of the competition. I mean, they could have just done that and avoided all of this back and forth garbage.
Well, it's that, and it's also don't force people not to play it. Like every time you ask and I don't know if this is Twitter just only posting the ones that fit their bill, but I assume it's not. Every time I see a clip of somebody asking a player during a press release how they feel about the Open Cup, they're all pissed about it. Like they all want to play. Now, again, I don't know if that's because they understand what social media is like and they know that if they go out and say, yeah, I'm happy not to be playing in it, that they're going to get roasted, or if they're being told to answer. Like I don't know what that comes from, but there isn't anybody I've seen who's come out and been like, oh, this is pretty good. Like I'm happy that I don't have to play the extra 2 games a year that I would have ended up playing anyway, because they enter in the third round. They enter in the round of 32. So at most you get 5 games, maybe 6. I think my numbers might be off, but again, if you want to hear us go deep into that logic, we did that in uh, episode 201. So go give that a listen if you want to do that. Then come on back. But I do want to kind of talk about historically, there is precedent to not have top division teams in your tournament. Multiple times in US Open Cup history, we've seen top leagues send either parts or none of their teams. So up until 2012, so through 2011, MLS only sent 8 teams. Granted, there were less teams involved and there was qualifying for it. So everybody was trying to play there, but they only picked 8 teams. NASL chose not to send any of their clubs ever for any year that they were in existence for a variety of reasons. And I was on and again, I'm going to disclaimer this by saying it was a Reddit thread. So, take the information what you will, but there was 19, 20, 25 comments saying that they didn't send them. They were worried about the playoffs being, the main focus because it's American sports. fear of being upstaged by lower level clubs because everybody was still spending on the same, level at that point. Um, and then I can't confirm this, but there was a comment there that said between the 1940s and the 1990s, my guess is when MLS came around, uh, there were no pro teams involved at all, right? Division 1. I don't really know how they defined pro in that sense, but the idea that this cup still continued with a massive lack of first team, um, top division, um, participation. And then after I said all that, went through all that, I still think it's a stupid idea, like not to do this. It's not the best model of success. Again, as I just mentioned, as we were leading up to this, you don't build upon history and build upon the work that you've done over the last 30 years by chopping things up and putting something new in there, right? We're going to have this conversation as we go down a little bit. And I understand that US Open Cup is not the most well attended for a variety of reasons. Yes, you can point at MLS's inability to um, promote the thing. There are tons of reasons you can point to it. I'm not going to get into that. But at the end of the day, there are parts of this that you can't just pick in place. So it's not the best model for success. One, for MLS, by the way, and two, for the sport as a whole, right? We talk about how we want to thrive and be a top division. And we saw 8, 10, 12 signings from USL Championship this year into MLS, and that's great. And we want more of that. But that doesn't happen if we're not supporting them in some way, right? I'm not saying take your $500 million transfer fee or expansion fee and the $10 million this dude spent in 2013 and then just flip flop them because, that's the way everybody else does. I'm not saying. But this was the one way that we were able to say, if we go and travel to you and you sell out your stadium, the Riverhounds, for example, last season, great. Use those funds to do whatever you want to do, right? This, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit, but this is the first decision I've seen MLS make that is somewhat in line with this idea that MLS is trying to kill lower league soccer. There are tons of decisions that have been made where we're like, oh, they're trying to kill off USL. No, they're trying to better themselves. This one, with the way that they're going about it, feels not great.
Yeah, I feel like, well, that's to say the least. I mean, they're trying to take the revenue away, but I wonder how much a lower league team, and I'm sure there's probably numbers on this somewhere on Reddit, Twitter, wherever in an article, but I wonder how much the lower league teams benefit from playing these US Open Cup games against MLS teams. Like whether it's a revenue thing, whether it's like I guess a reputational thing, that might be hard to measure, but I guess from a revenue perspective, like how much are they getting from the couple of games they do get against MLS teams? Like that's kind of what I'm wondering. Like I'm sure there probably are better ways to support the lower leagues as opposed to just the US Open Cup. Again, I don't want that to seem like justification for what MLS is doing, but I do feel like there's probably better ways to support them. And again, other than Pro Rel, which we're not going to dive into that discussion. But again, I'm also not an expert here, so I don't have an answer at the moment, at least, as to what would be a better way to support them. I'm sure there are ideas out there as to better ways to support the lower leagues, but I mean, pulling out a U.S. Open Cup certainly is anything but supporting them. And then,
That's the opposite, right?
yeah,
There were decent ones as a start, right? First off, the transfers coming in is good, right? They're paying money, they're giving money to these clubs. Are they underselling them? Maybe. I think they're probably USL is getting to that point now where they've got players worth selling, and they're where MLS was 15 years ago, where it's like, oh, we got players we're going to sell. Somebody wants them, but we got to let them go for cheap because we don't have our name on the map yet, right? USL is probably in that same boat, a million or under for their movements, right? There is this other idea as well. Like everybody's talking about the MLS to USLC how much MLS pulling out matters. And this is where I was kind of going with the USL almost pulling out too would have been really bad, because as much as USL championship clubs wouldn't benefit off of the MLS ticket prices, I guess, for lack of a better term, USLC is the highest level that other people are going to play as well, right? Like you think about USL2 teams that make a run past a USL1 side, and they're now going up against the Riverhounds, and the Riverhounds travel out to friggin'
Make up a city, Wilmington.
well, no, I know one. There's I think the Rough Riders are still technically USL2.
Okay, there you
So
go.
go out to Long Island Rough Riders, and now you're out here in Suffolk County, Long Island, and these guys are oh man, you get to sell the story of the Riverhounds or whatever. Well, this is the highest they're gonna get, right? Regardless of if MLS is in there. So there was this whole thing at play for a hot minute where it was like, are you sure it's about the cup and what it means? Or are you just out here throwing another fit because MLS is doing something you don't like? And again, I'm very happy that they chose not to pursue that path, because that would have killed the cup. If USL Championship and pulled USL and USL1 because MLS didn't do it, well then that's how you kill the cup. So I asked this question maybe to myself, but I'll also ask it to you because we're in a conversation here. If MLS isn't there, does the cup die? I don't think so, right? History has shown up it's more than capable of surviving without the help of the top division, unless it is so heavily leaning on the one league for this financial viability that it wouldn't be able to pay out the little bit that it does for these transportation reimbursements and whatever it does pay out after it takes its gate fees. It still survives, right? It'll still be there. You can still play the cup. You can have the argument about whether it's worth it, or I think you used the term like what was the term you used at the beginning? Houston got the last ever legitimate, I think was the term. Legitimate Open Cup. Was that the right word?
I don't think it
I don't
was
think
legitimate. It
no, I
was
don't think
like,
that's the right word.
yeah, I can't remember the word either.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and scrub it. But right, the significance of it, does it drop a little bit? Maybe. Um, we'll go into that a little bit more. But do you think MLS leaves, the cup dies?
I think in the short term, no, but I do think in the long term, I could definitely see it in that matter. So I mean, if MLS keeps growing at the way that they're growing, eventually you're just in a situation where if you're in the US, you're probably just watching MLS. And if MLS is not in the cup, I think it's just going to get probably less people to focus on it. The more like the big names and the exciting players start to come over to the US, I think it slowly draws people away from USL if they can't keep up. And maybe that's not at the fault of the US Open Cup. Maybe that's just a discussion on the difference or the gap, I should say, between USL Championship and MLS. But I mean, yeah, I could definitely see it in the long term becoming much more of an issue if they're not there.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I didn't really think long term. Everything's been kind of short sighted for me. But I agree with that. I think it's a long term issue that versus a short term issue where you can go through it. I also think that it'll depend on what CONCACAF does with that CCC spot. So I've heard rumors that if MLS didn't play in it, then the Open Cup champion wouldn't be invited into the Champions Cup, which I think is ridiculous. Excuse me. Because that if that happens, then I agree. Then there's no reason to play it other than bragging rights about being the lowest, the lower tier champion, which England has a cup like that, and it's great because they've got teams with 100 years of history, and they love to say, hey, my club won something. The stadium I grew up from down the road is a champion. That's awesome, right? Don't think that would work so well here. But anyways, if they were able to keep that Champions Cup spot viable, right, where the winner still gets a spot in, I think that actually raises the intensity of the Open Cup without MLS, because now you've got teams that are much closer in uh I'll use the term finances, right? What they pay players and um the competition level. It's all a lot closer than MLS to anything else, which is just again the difference between USL Championship and MLS is very monetarily is similar to MLS to the Premier League, right? Like there's just such a massive gap of what you can afford to bring in. So if you are able to then say, okay, if you're a USL Championship side and you win the Open Cup, you're going to go play down in Motagua in Honduras, and you're going to go and do this travel if you can afford it. Again, I don't know
Yeah,
if
I was just thinking that. I was like,
that would
can
be
they
the tough
afford
part,
that?
right? But again, that then makes that cup even more. I don't want to use the term important, but like it
Yeah,
stresses it a little
meaningful.
bit more for those lower clubs because now you have something even bigger to play for with a better chance to get into this massive competition that you wouldn't really have the chance to get in without it, right?
I think the better question is with the expanded CCL, why are there no USL teams in there at all? Like period. Like you can't tell me that some of the top teams in USL Championship are worse in quality than some of the teams that make it into CCL. Like you can't. Like there's they could definitely beat a number of teams that make it to CCL. I'm not saying they're getting far. I'm not saying they're, knocking down like making some Cinderella run all the way to the finals or anything. Like I think they would be good to win like it would be a really impressive run if they were able to win like more than one round, but I can't. It's not like a situation like there's no pro route. It's not like they're technically a league below MLS. Like you could look at the valuations and the reputation and all that, and like yes, you could say very easily that MLS is more valuable, more has like a stronger reputation, but it's not pro route. Like why shouldn't USL Championship get spots in an expanded CCL? And
Yeah.
maybe the cup without MLS is the way, like you were saying. Like it definitely makes it way more meaningful because that puts so many more eyes on your team. I 100% agree. I think that would be much better for those teams to, like now they get to, face off against some new competition. Whereas like they don't get the opportunities that MLS gets with something like Leagues Cup, where they get to play against League MX teams.
Yeah, and that was kind of my big thing when I heard this news that USL was just going to pull teams from the principle of it. It's like I get it, but I don't because if you really were worried about the growth, and I got to pick the right words here because I don't want to sound like I'm, oh, these guys are ungrateful, right? I don't want to be like old man on yelling at a cloud here, but it's such a massive opportunity to grow the game at your level, grow the game at your area, right? If you can get in and play these international teams, maybe why would you turn that away? I don't know. But again, they haven't, which is great. I so I'm trying to figure out which way I want to go with this because I can take it two different ways and just want to see if it how I'll make it flow. I'm going to go to this point here, and I think